This is my second video on the greatest flaw of the Brompton, and I'm hoping to conclude this process. I think I fixed my Brompton and I know what to do and how to do it. If you are new on this channel, this is a channel I use to publish videos on tech, on anything that runs on small wheels, electric bikes, scooters, you name it, even cars, although I do not yet have a car video, but it's coming. If you are interested in this topic, you can subscribe. There is also a link below that is going to point you to a resource page in case you're interested about any of the items I review in my videos. There are links to practically everything I've ever spoken about. The main tool set I've used to accomplish this job is my Hexagonal Set. I highly recommend that you get a full set if you have a European bike such as the Brompton, but many others, the Molten Bird, all of these bikes. Get a set that has both the millimeter as well as the inch based sizes, and a full size from the biggest to the smallest. I started out by buying a tiny set of 3 or 4 keys and then buying another set and another set, and finally I ended up spending more money than if I just went out there and spent 8 or 10 bucks on a full set, which is what I have now. So this is very useful, it's very important. I use it for everything, not just the bikes, but a variety of add-ons and various things that I buy anyway. The second product that I should be recommending, although I did not use it for this job, I used something else, Loctite. It's very commonly used, certainly helps a lot. It's basically a compound that holds a screw in the hole, so it's not so easy for it to turn and gradually come out. The product I did use to install the front carrier block is actually Aquarium Silicone. I know the Loctite is the professional product to recommend, but I used to be in the marine aquarium hobby for a very long time, and so I know what Aquarium Silicone can do, and it is just an amazing product that I thought would do a better job with in this case. Aquarium Silicone is an amazing sealant and product. It has incredible strength. It attaches to everything that's solid, no matter how smooth or how porous it might be, and it has amazing strength, enough to hold together a glass aquarium holding hundreds of gallons of salt water with a bunch of sea rock and coral. So I know how powerful it is, and at the same time it's very easy to take it off. So if you have a razor blade, it has practically no resistance to cutting or stabbing or twisting moves. So if I want to remove my screw that I embedded in silicone, it should be no problem at all. At the same time, it also forms a rubber-like, completely waterproof and airtight seal that acts like rubber. So what I'm expecting it to do is to dampen the vibration on the screw and thereby limit the stress. Having had a miserable experience with a custom aftermarket front block, I decided to just go to my favorite Brampton dealer, which is B-Fold in Manhattan, and get a brand new set, the traditional plastic Brampton Block, which is actually an incredibly rugged and well-designed product. The only problem I have with it is the screws, the sizing of the screws, and the way they are installed. But I can tell you, after 6 years of really hard riding, I see no deterioration on my original block. The only reason I got a new block was because they don't sell the screws just by themselves. There are some people on the web who might sell you just the screws for really just a few dollars, but if you go to your local Brampton dealer and you want it right away, the chances are you're going to have to buy the whole set, which costs about $30. The independent screws you can get just for a few dollars, but they are not so easy to get. So these are the new screws, the new metal plate, and the new washers. As you can see, what Brompton is trying to do is to use M5 screws, which in my opinion are too small. They should be using M6, but you know, they use the M5, and these ribbed washers are supposed to hook into those little holes that they punctured around the screw hole, those little bumps. The problem with this is that no matter how much you tighten the screw, it's really not going to work all that well, unless you apply a product such as the Loctite or the Aquarium Silicone, which I have used. Even then, I would prefer an M6 screw set, but I think a reinforced way of using the M5 is going to very solidly install the front block to last for many years, maybe for a decade. The original sloppy installation without the product, without the Loctite or silicone, lasted on me for about 6 years before it actually broke. So that's a pretty good time, especially since I rode like crazy racing road bikes for the first 3 years of the bike's life, and I routinely carry around minimum 10 pounds. I would say between 10 and 13-14 pounds on the average day, and even when my bike is in storage, the whole weight is on it. This is just something you have to pay attention to when you have an electric version of the Brompton, whether you built it or whether you bought it from Brompton. The interesting thing here is the dealer told me that here and there he did encounter broken screws with people, which are nearly impossible to fix. So what he's doing now is that whenever people bring in a Brompton for regular service and checkup, he removes the front plate on the front carrier block and tightens the screws and checks to make sure that everything is okay. It's not a frequent problem, but it can occur, especially if you regularly carry heavy weights, or if the screws were sloppily screwed in to begin with in the factory, which is possible. It could be a human error, and especially if you have an electric bike with a battery on it. I was totally shocked to find out that the standard electric Brompton is sold with the same M5 screws and the same installation that you see here. I thought Brompton would upsize the screw or use bolts or miter it all in, but no, apparently it's just the same set that is hidden behind a plastic block, so it has to be regularly checked and serviced. This was my original broken screw set, and you can see that the washers are pretty much intact, but you can see on the metal plate that they really grabbed into the metal, and they were rotating to the left as the screws were gradually unraveling, and they really scratched into the metal. So even if you don't reinstall the screws, you don't use any product, just checking to make sure that the screws are tight and maybe replacing them every few years really makes sense. If you do decide to go with the silicone is a marvelous sealant, but it's very difficult to store. If it has access to even just a milligram of air, it's going to dry out within days. So the only way I found it possible to store it for months is to wrap it as airtight as I can manage in a plastic bag, and then put the plastic bag inside the Ziploc bag and try to press the air out of the Ziploc bag as much as possible. Amazingly enough, this seems to work. I applied a generous amount of silicone onto the screws and into the screw holes, and I was amazed at how easily everything went in just as brand new. So I was really lucky to have been able to drill out the broken screws, and I think with this new silicone setup, with all the rubberized or rubber-like suspension it gives to the screws, I don't think it's going to break again. But just to make sure, I will be checking every few months. If nothing breaks, then maybe once a year. And I think that the whole front block is going to be replaced together with the screws every 5 years. Original video which talks about the flaw itself and how I tried to fix it with an aftermarket block. So I'd like to comment on some of these. Isn't the plastic carrier the correct choice because it's going to give up before the screws would give up? I think the plastic carrier is very well designed. I have had no cracks, no deterioration on it after riding my very powerful and fast Brompton like crazy for 6 years. So I don't think the plastic carrier is a problem. I think the problem is entirely just the screws and the way the screws are installed, really. Here's another comment about the original electric Brompton is only 250 watts. I installed something that's 3 times as powerful. Couldn't that be the cause? Obviously, the more powerful the motor, the more stress you are able to put on your bike if you want to use it that way. For the last 2.5 years, ever since the lockdown, that I have not been commuting, I'm actually pretty gentle on the bike, and I use the power of it just to go uphill in comfort. There is some sense to this, but the bottom line is you don't even have to have an electric setup. If you haul around a lot of stuff day after day, say you go to the grocery store and you fill up your bag and come home with 15 pounds of weight every day, then the screw problem is it can break your bike. So I recommend that you check the screws regularly. I recommend every single person who has a Brompton and uses a front bag to do this right now. Remove the front plate, which you can do with a simple screwdriver, and use a hex key. I told you to get a hex key set if you don't already have one. I think it was a 3mm or 4mm hexagonal key. Just make sure that the screw is tight enough. Ideally, I would, if you carry heavy weights or if you have an electric setup of any kind, whether you bought it from Brompton or whether you installed it yourself, I highly recommend that you put some product in it, like a tread lock or something like that, or silicone, whichever you like, and screw it in tight and check every few months. It cannot hurt. If you see that the screws are okay after 3 months, you don't need to check every 3 months. You can just slow down to maybe once a year, once a half year or so. Somebody's asking if this is an original Brompton frame. Yes, this is an original nickel-plated Brompton frame, and the decals have been removed because I consider them ugly. Somebody's asking me about the kit I installed at Brompton. I will have a video about the details of what's installed on my Brompton and how I tuned it and how I installed it. And here somebody's talking about modifying the Brompton by installing an electric kit. Is that the cause of it? Obviously, carrying an 8-pound battery or whatever, an 8-pound object in the front regularly and riding fast, which you can do without any modification or any electric propulsion installed. Obviously, that increases the stress on the bag. But just as I mentioned, if you buy an electric bike from Brompton itself, you have the same problem. If you carry heavy bags regularly, you have the same problem. So I recommend that you guys follow my advice, what I just said, and check it right away. If you don't really use the bag much, or you just carry light weights, then it's unlikely you will have a problem with it. I would still check at least once a year to make sure that the screws are really in, because they can shake out and come out gradually. So that's all I have to say for this video, and until the next one.